And welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, for generations, the Commonwealth of Virginia had a pretty good reputation. It was famous for its verdant horse farms, the subtle beauty of its mountains, and the gentlemanly common sense of its politics. 8 American presidents came from Virginia, including, of course, our first president, George Washington. The Declaration of Independence was written by a Virginian. The first Christmas tree in this country was decorated in Virginia. Virginia was a stable, sensible place. It was not Florida. And yet suddenly it is. In fact, just this morning, Florida mocked Virginia for getting completely out of control in public. Settle down, said Florida. You're embarrassing yourself. And indeed, Virginia is doing just that. In the past week, that state's top 3 elected officials, all Democrats, have fallen into potentially career-ending scandals over their personal behavior. Trainwreck does not begin to describe what is happening in Virginia. It's been like a 50-car pileup on I-81 south of Roanoke. It's a disaster. Fox's Ed Henry has been watching slack-jawed since the beginning of this unfolding story, and he joins us now with an update. Hey, Ed.
Tucker, good to see you. It's hard to find a hero in this mess you just laid out, but maybe it's the wife of Governor Ralph Northam, who didn't just stop him from doing the moonwalk. She also helped convince him to not step down despite intense pressure at the beginning. That may have turned out to be wise counsel by Pam Northam. If Northam had given in to the political mob, there could have been a far deeper crisis in Virginia. The governorship would have gone to Democratic Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. He's now embroiled in a charge of sexual assault he denies. Next in line would be Democratic State Attorney General Mark Herring. He's now admitted he, too, appeared in blackface at least once in college. Now, in the wake of the push among some Democrats to believe all women during the Justice Brett Kavanaugh controversy, it's notable that a senior Democratic congressman has now been drawn in. Congressman Bobby Scott says roughly a year ago he heard the allegations of sexual assault from the alleged victim herself, Dr. Vanessa Tyson, though he just heard there was a Me Too problem, but did not hear the graphic details Tyson has now claimed about being forced into oral sex. Fairfax has hired the same attorney who represented Justice Kavanaugh. And the lieutenant governor's team has fired off a letter to NBC demanding a correction to a report that charged in a private meeting the lieutenant governor said of his accuser, F that B. Fairfax insists he was just using profanity to express general frustration about false allegations. New today, a Republican was drawn in. State Senator Tommy Norment reportedly oversaw a yearbook at the Virginia Military Institute in 1968 filled with racist photos and slurs. He says he did not directly edit that part. The Washington Post, which published the first allegations against Kavanaugh, but held back on publishing a story about the Fairfax allegations, today had an editorial saying Northam should resign. Our correspondent in Richmond, Ellison Barber, noticed one sole pro-Northam protester outside the governor's mansion shouting through a bullhorn, "I know you're a good man. Do not resign." Tucker?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Ed Henry, thank you for that.
Good to see you.
Judging by the news recently, it seems like an awful lot of people are showing up at parties dressed in costumes designed to look like members of another race. Blackface suddenly seems ubiquitous. But is it? What percentage of the American population do you think has publicly appeared in blackface? Have you done it yourself? Do you know anyone else who has? Probably not. The real number has to be pretty low. Now ask yourself, what percentage of high-profile progressives have worn blackface in public? Well, let's see. 2 of the 3 highest-ranking Democrats in the state of Virginia are white, and both of them have worn blackface. As a statistical matter, that is an astounding ratio. But it probably shouldn't surprise us. Blackface turns out to be fairly common on the elite left. Actor Ted Danson once showed up at a Friars Club roast for his girlfriend Whoopi Goldberg wearing blackface. Goldberg now co-hosts The View on ABC. The View is a show that covers the intersection of scandal and politics. And yet, strangely, its co-hosts have said very little about the blackface controversy now unfolding in Virginia. And maybe that's why. Or possibly it's because Goldberg's colleague, Joy Behar, has also appeared in blackface. We know that because Behar once bragged about it.
Is that you, Joy?
Oh, you know this picture.
Joy, is that you?
That is me.
My word. What year is this? Circa
I
what?
was 29. It was a Halloween party. I went as a beautiful African woman.
Oh, yes, you ain't black.
But that's my hair. That's my hair. That is me.
Did you have tanning lotion on, Joy?
I had makeup that was a little bit darker than my skin.
Well, given the new standards we're living under, that's a little shocking. Actor Sarah Silverman won't judge Behar, though. Silverman has appeared in blackface, too. She's got that in common with her longtime boyfriend, Jimmy Kimmel, also of ABC. Kimmel not only wore blackface, but he affected what used to be called an urban accent. He did that on camera. Over on NBC, there's been quite a bit of blackface over the years, though you'd never know it from how the network attacked its former anchor, Megyn Kelly. Kelly, for the record, has never appeared in blackface. She's never even performed next to someone in blackface. She merely asked a question about blackface. You can't say the same thing for Tom Hanks, though. Watch this.
5,000 shares of soon-to-be IPO. I know there's people out there that are foaming over this idea of 5,000 IPO Chorus Plasma Series C preferred stocks and bonds. Remember, with these things. There we go. What is 13,000 here? 13. Anybody else?
Tom Hanks works in the movie business, so you'd think his peers would be deeply offended by the tape you just saw, but they're not. Keep in mind that Hollywood once produced a movie whose lead character wore blackface for much of the film. The movie was called Soul Man. It came out in 1986. If that seems like a long time ago, keep in mind that it was after Ronald Reagan made Martin Luther King the subject of a national holiday. Attitudes in America really weren't that different back then. Blackface was not a mainstream phenomenon in 1986. Hollywood just couldn't imagine living by its own rules, then or now. It's pretty clear that the very people most likely to wear blackface are also the most likely to demand that you get fired if you do the same. That's the definition of hypocrisy, but it's deeper than that. Hypocrisy isn't simply a recurring feature of modern liberalism, it's the whole point of it. Being a progressive allows you to attack others for the very same sins that you yourself are committing in greater abundance. And that's not just true of wearing blackface, it's true of everything. Let's say you got rich doing something that earlier generations would have recognized as dishonorable, if not criminal. You manipulated international currency markets, for example, or you placed huge bets in the stock market based on insider information, or you stripped functioning companies for parts and left the employees with nothing. Let's say you made a quick bundle doing something like that, and many have. In order to show your friends just how rich you were, you'd then, of course, purchase the usual vulgar merit badges, the private airplanes, walled estates, football-sized yachts. The point would be to brag about your wealth. And yet, on some level, you wouldn't feel especially good about this. Why would you? You didn't help anyone but yourself. You're a selfish and mediocre person, and you know it. So how would you make yourself feel better? Giving the money back is too obvious and also too costly. Maintaining your yacht is expensive. You need the money. Instead, you might decide to join a movement that accuses other people of destroying the planet by consuming too much. Suddenly, your own overconsumption might not seem so sinful. At least you're a deeply caring person. And you'd tell yourself that as you flew private to global warming conferences all over the world. That's what Tom Steyer did, and Mike Bloomberg and Leonardo DiCaprio. That's what they tell themselves. This attitude defines our ruling class. Once you understand that, contemporary politics comes into focus. Why are people with private security forces demanding that you give up your guns? How come so many womanizers pose as feminists? How did Ted Kennedy lead the women's movement after he abandoned a young woman to die at the scene of a drunk driving accident he caused? Another on the subject, why is it always that the very people who attack others on the basis of their skin color happen to be the first people to lecture the rest of us about racism? What is all this? Well, they know they're guilty of the very same things. It all makes sense now. Ask any waiter how well progressives tip. Seriously, ask a waiter. A group of progressive activists arrives at a restaurant. They linger for hours delivering passionate lectures about the horrors of income inequality. When they leave, they shaft the working people who've served them food, the very people they claim to care about. Only with progressivism is this behavior possible. Precisely because they care so much about structural inequality, progressives don't have to leave actual cash on an actual table for actual workers. Their tip is their profound sense of caring. Too bad waiters can't pay the rent with that. This is all a profound departure from what we have had before. Conventional politics concerns itself with improving people's lives. We can argue about how to do that, but the goal is always the same, always has been the same, to make citizens happier, safer, more content, and prosperous. Modern progressivism is very different. It has nothing to do with any of that. Modern progressives care about virtue and redemption and the expiation of sin. That's not a political philosophy. It's a religion, an especially rigid form of religion, the kind of religion that produces witch hunts and inquisitions. So the press has played a pretty central role in the dramas now unfolding in Virginia. Larry O'Connor has been paying close attention to that. He's an associate editor at the Washington Times. You can hear him, and you should hear him on the radio in Washington and out in Los Angeles. He joins us tonight. So, Larry, you have been paying attention to the genesis of the story. It seemed to come out of nowhere, the allegations precisely against the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Justin Fairfax. But it turns out they had been floating around for a while in media circles. Tell us
That's right. And specifically,
happened?
Tucker, the Washington Post, of course, right here in D.C., which covers Virginia politics, they had this story during the 2017 campaign when Justin Fairfax was running for lieutenant governor. And they decided that they were going to ignore it because who could corroborate it? It was he said, she said. Interesting note there, though, is, of course, it was a completely different standard when it came to the Brett Kavanaugh story and Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. But furthermore, when Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax made his very first statement about these allegations last week, he not only said that the Washington Post had the story, but they decided not to run with it because there were inaccuracies. He said that the Washington Post had found discrepancies in the story. So Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax's very first statement on this contained a lie. The Washington Post actually denied that there were any inaccuracies. So right there, you've got quite a bit to talk about just in this one part of this story.
What's interesting to me is the precision of the parallels here. You've got two professors from California, both Democrats, both making allegations, exactly right, against powerful men in the public eye. Both of them tell their stories to the Washington Post, but the Washington Post only runs one of those stories.
That's right. And also, I mean, as one starts to question these stories that are being made by these women who say that they're victims, you have to compare how thorough both stories are, how detailed they are, whether those stories change or not. And also, you know, one always asks, what is the motive for a woman to lie? Well, in the case of the Kavanaugh story, let's face it, Dr. Ford was a Democrat. She opposed Trump. She opposed Kavanaugh's politics. Not so in this case. These two, actually, the alleged incident happened when they were both at the 2004 convention for John Kerry in Boston. They're both Democrats, and they're both activists for liberal causes. So you take that motive out. Why would this woman lie about Lieutenant Governor Fairfax? There's one other thing that I think everyone needs to bear in mind here, because obviously I talk about media a lot here, Tucker. I talk about the media bias that we perceive and see. But this is important. This isn't just about the 2017 election and what it would do for these individual Democrats. The media at that time were building a very big narrative. Virginia was the first state to vote right after the Trump election, right? Virginia votes 1 year after a Maine election. A big narrative was built here that the blue wave was coming, and every Democrat in Virginia symbolized that. The media at that time, they didn't want to do any investigation of these candidates. They didn't want to look into their closets or look under their bed, and they certainly didn't want to run a story like this because it would have upset that very large narrative they took into 2018.
Exactly right. Would any of these three sitting politicians, the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, have been elected had voters known what we know now? Had the Washington Post done its job? No. Right. So they were doing their job in the way that Jeff Bezos approves of, which is
exactly. And that would have done away with that very important narrative that Virginia rejects Trumpism, America rejects Trumpism. Here comes the big wave.
Larry O'Connor joining us tonight. Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.